So look, this is a landmark report that, as you've said, is 6 years in the making. It's more than 1,700 pages in length, so some of the finer details are still emerging, but the key findings so far are quite damning. They've found that the fire, which killed 72 people, including 18 children, was the result of decades of successive failures by governments, by the construction industry, and it even criticised some of the practices of the London Fire Brigade. Now, I'll take you through some of those specific findings now. It found that for building manufacturers, there was systemic dishonesty, and that was from cladding and insulation companies. And they also said that there were attempts to conceal the fire risks, in particular by the company that put the cladding on the Grenfell Tower itself, so that they had tried to conceal the fire risks deliberately. Now, when it comes to the government, there have been criticisms of the government ignoring warnings about the fire risks of these high-rise buildings. The report went on to say that the government knew a year in advance of the Grenfell Tower fire that there were fire risks in these types of buildings, and that it failed to act on this knowledge. When it comes to the fire brigade, it found that it lacked a strategy to evacuate the building once the fire had lost control, and that there was an unfounded belief that a fire like what we saw at the Grenfell Tower in 2017 couldn't possibly happen. So these are just some of the key findings, but there are a number of different failures that have been outlined in this extensive report that has been years and years in the making. As well as these findings, there are recommendations. So there are 58 recommendations that have been made by this inquiry group to try and prevent a similar tragedy from happening again. We've already seen some changes in legislation and practices regarding cladding on buildings, not just here in the UK, but also in Australia and around the world. So these recommendations build on what has already happened in the last 7 years. Now, when he was handing down the findings of this report, the chair of the inquiry said that all of the deaths in this fire, all 72 deaths, were unavoidable. Here's a little of what he had to say.
Simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants.
So, Michelle, are we expecting any criminal charges to follow?
So there's a separate criminal investigation that has been ongoing into this Grenfell Tower tragedy over the past 7 years, and that is still ongoing. Since the release of this report, London's Metropolitan Police has said that it will look through and comb through this report line by line to look at any additional evidence that it will then add to its own criminal investigation, but that it could take another 12 to 18 months before any possible charges are laid. Now, they've previously said that there are dozens of individuals and companies that are on their list of suspects, so there is potential for charges to be laid in the future. However, one of the really big criticisms that we've heard from the families and relatives of some of the victims in this Grenfell Tower tragedy is that justice is just taking too long, and that having an additional year before any criminal charges are laid, and then beyond that any sentencing, it could be a number of years before anyone is held really accountable for these deaths. So there's been criticism of the time that's been taken, and a lot of people here in the UK that have been impacted by this fire really want justice, and they want to see it much sooner than what is happening.